The morning of July 17th began like any other. Commuters grumbled about train delays, the stock market buzzed with anticipation, and the news cycle churned with the usual mix of political squabbles and celebrity gossip. Then, the birds started talking. It began subtly. A viral video surfaced online, filmed by a bewildered tourist in Rio de Janeiro. The clip showed a brightly plumed parrot perched outside a bustling brokerage firm. What caught the internet's attention wasn't the bird's vibrant colors, but its uncanny ability to recite, in perfect Portuguese, the fluctuating stock prices of Petrobras. The parrot squawked out numbers with an almost bored inflection, occasionally pausing to preen its feathers before launching into another string of financial data. The video was initially dismissed as a clever hoax, a well-executed deepfake. But then, more videos emerged. From London came reports of pigeons in Trafalgar Square reciting lines from Shakespearean sonnets. The pigeons, usually content with pecking at discarded crumbs, now strutted about, delivering eloquent verses with surprising clarity. One particularly bold pigeon, perched atop Nelson's column, even managed a passable rendition of Hamlet's "To be or not to be" soliloquy, complete with dramatic pauses. At first, the phenomenon was met with amusement. Late-night talk show hosts mined the talking birds for comedic gold. Scientists, however, were cautiously intrigued. Ornithologists scrambled to study the birds, analyzing their vocal cords and brain activity, searching for any biological explanation for this sudden linguistic leap. Linguists debated whether the birds were truly understanding the words they were uttering, or simply mimicking sounds with remarkable accuracy. The initial reactions were largely positive. People marveled at the apparent intelligence of the avian world. Theories abounded, ranging from genetic mutations to environmental factors. Some even suggested the birds were somehow tapping into a collective consciousness, accessing information beyond human comprehension. The scientific community, while fascinated, remained skeptical. They cautioned against anthropomorphizing the birds, emphasizing the need for rigorous research and empirical evidence. Dr. Emily Carter, a renowned neurobiologist, stated in a televised interview, "While these reports are certainly intriguing, it's crucial to avoid jumping to conclusions. We need to understand the underlying mechanisms driving this behavior before we can even begin to speculate about its implications." However, the light-hearted atmosphere wouldn't last. The novelty soon wore off as the birds' utterances became increasingly unsettling. The fragmented nature of their speech took on a darker tone. The seemingly random snippets of language began to coalesce into something far more disturbing than simple mimicry. The parrot in Rio, for instance, stopped reciting stock prices and began muttering cryptic phrases like, "Sell everything, before the fall, the sky is bleeding." The pigeons in London abandoned Shakespeare in favor of chilling pronouncements like, "The river knows, she's still there, beneath the bridge." The shift was subtle at first, easily dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation. But as more and more reports surfaced from around the globe, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The birds weren't just talking, they were delivering messages, fragmented and distorted, but undeniably laced with dread. The world was about to discover that these weren't just clever mimics. They were something far more complex, and far more terrifying. The age of the talking birds had begun, and with it, a new era of unease settled over the planet. The shift from amusing mimicry to unsettling pronouncements wasn't sudden, but a gradual descent into the bizarre. At first, the cryptic phrases were dismissed as random noise, meaningless juxtapositions of words and sounds. But as more data poured in from around the world, a chilling pattern began to emerge. The birds weren't just mimicking, they were creating collages of speech, drawing from disparate sources and weaving them together into unsettling tapestries of language. The most disturbing aspect was the sheer variety of sources the birds seemed to access. Reports began to surface of birds using dead languages. In a remote village in Greece, an elderly woman swore that the sparrows nesting in her olive grove were chattering in ancient Mycenaean, a language spoken over 3,000 years ago. A professor of classics, upon hearing a recording, confirmed the woman's claim, identifying several phrases related to agricultural rituals and forgotten deities. Even more unsettling were the reports of birds quoting obscure texts, A flock of crows in a small town in Maine was documented reciting passages from the Necronomicon, a fictional grimoire of forbidden knowledge created by H.P. Lovecraft. The crows called out phrases in a guttural, almost chanting tone, sending shivers down the spines of anyone who dared to listen. But perhaps the most disturbing development was the birds' apparent awareness of local tragedies. In several instances, birds began referencing missing person cases. In Atlanta, a blue jay perched on a lamppost near the home of a recently vanished college student began repeating the student's name, followed by the chilling phrase, "Lost in the woods, the creek remembers." The student's body was later found near a creek several miles from her home, the cause of death undetermined. These weren't isolated incidents. Similar reports poured in from across the globe. Birds seemed to be tapping into a source of information beyond human comprehension, accessing knowledge that was hidden, forgotten, or deliberately suppressed. The cheerful chirping of birdsong was replaced by an unsettling chorus of fragmented voices, whispering secrets and hinting at hidden horrors. The media, initially eager to sensationalize the story, began to adopt a more cautious tone. News reports focused on the scientific investigations, downplaying the more outlandish claims. But the public, fueled by online forums and social media, was increasingly gripped by fear and paranoia. Conspiracy theories flourished, ranging from government experiments gone awry to alien interventions. The psychological impact of the talking birds was immense. People began to distrust their surroundings, questioning the reality they had once taken for granted. The familiar sounds of nature, once a source of comfort and solace, now evoked anxiety and dread. Every chirp, every call, every coo was scrutinized for hidden meaning, for a glimpse into the unsettling truth that the birds seemed to possess. The world had changed. The birds were no longer just birds. They were messengers, oracles, and harbingers of something unknown and terrifying. The playful mimicry had given way to a chilling awareness, a sense that the avian world was privy to secrets that humanity was not meant to know, and as the birds continued to speak, the world held its breath, waiting to hear what they would say next. The unsettling collages of speech were becoming clearer, more coherent, and more terrifying with each passing day. The pattern was emerging, and it was pointing towards something truly dreadful. As the world grappled with the increasingly bizarre pronouncements of the avian population, one name began to surface. Repeatedly in online forums and hushed conversations, Dr. Eris Thorne. A disgraced ornithologist, Thorne had spent years on the fringes of the scientific community, peddling what most considered to be outlandish theories about avian intelligence. His magnum opus, The Avian Singularity, a hypothesis of collective consciousness, published a decade prior, had been widely ridiculed, effectively ending his academic career. Thorne's central argument was that birds, far from being simple creatures, driven by instinct, possessed a complex form of collective intelligence. He theorized that they were capable of communicating and sharing information on a scale that humans couldn't comprehend, potentially even acting as a single, unified consciousness spread across the globe. His evidence was largely anecdotal, based on years of observing bird behavior and interpreting their songs and calls in unconventional ways. He saw patterns where others saw randomness, and meaning where others heard only noise. Before the talking bird phenomenon, Thorne was a pariah, a laughingstock. His research grants had been revoked, his papers rejected, and his reputation tarnished. He retreated into self-imposed exile, living in a remote cabin in the Appalachian Mountains, continuing his research in obscurity, funded by a dwindling inheritance and the occasional odd job. But now, with the world in a state of avian-induced panic, Thorne was suddenly a prophet. His previously derided theories were now being re-examined with a newfound sense of urgency. The media, desperate for answers, descended upon his secluded cabin, eager to hear his explanation for the inexplicable. Government agencies, initially dismissive of his work, now sought his expertise, hoping he could decipher the bird's cryptic messages and avert a potential catastrophe. Thorne, initially hesitant, was eventually persuaded to step back into the spotlight. He saw this as his chance to finally prove his theories and redeem his reputation. He emerged from his self-imposed exile, a gaunt figure with wild eyes and a tangled beard, but with a renewed sense of purpose. In his first televised interview, Thorne reiterated his belief that the birds were acting as a collective, a single consciousness communicating through a network of avian messengers. He argued that their fragmented speech wasn't random, but rather a deliberate attempt to convey complex information in a way that humans could understand. He proposed that the birds were reacting to some external threat, an environmental or cosmic event that was imperceptible to human senses. "They are trying to warn us," Thorne declared, his voice trembling with conviction. "They are trying to tell us something that we desperately need to know. We must listen to them. We must decipher their message before it's too late." Thorne's pronouncements were met with a mix of skepticism and hope. Some dismissed him as a crackpot, clinging to his discredited theories in the face of overwhelming evidence. Others saw him as a potential savior, the only person who could unlock the secrets of the talking birds and save humanity from impending doom, regardless of public opinion. Thorne was now a key player in the unfolding drama. He was given access to government resources, a team of researchers, and the full attention of the world's leading experts in linguistics, ornithology, and cryptography. His task was simple, yet daunting: to decipher the birds' cryptic messages and uncover the truth behind their unsettling pronouncements. The fate of humanity, it seemed, rested on the shoulders of a disgraced ornithologist and his long-derided theories of avian intelligence. Dr. Thorne's efforts to understand the birds' fragmented pronouncements were initially met with frustration. The collages of speech seemed almost deliberately designed to be incomprehensible. But as his team meticulously analyzed the recordings, searching for patterns and connections, they began to notice recurring themes, motifs that hinted at a larger narrative. Then, it happened. On August 1st, at precisely noon Greenwich Mean Time, the world witnessed a coordinated global event unlike anything it had ever seen. In every major city across the planet, flocks of birds, numbering in the thousands, descended from the skies and gathered in prominent locations: Times Square in New York, the Eiffel Tower in Paris, Red Square in Moscow, Shibuya Crossing in Tokyo. And then they began to speak. This time, there were no fragmented phrases, no obscure quotations, no references to local tragedies. The birds spoke with a unified voice, repeating the same message, translated into dozens of languages. The message was simple, direct, and undeniably ominous. "The fire comes from the sky. Seek shelter in the earth. The old stones will protect you. Heed the whisper of the wind." The message was cryptic, but its intent was clear: a warning. A warning of a coming disaster, a cataclysmic event that threatened to engulf the world. The phrase, "The fire comes from the sky," was particularly chilling, evoking images of meteor strikes, solar flares, or even nuclear war. The coordinated nature of the event was undeniable proof of Thorne's theory of avian collective consciousness. The birds were acting as a single entity, communicating a message of vital importance to humanity. But what did it mean? What was the fire coming from the sky? And where could people find shelter in the earth? The world reacted with a mixture of fear and disbelief. News channels broadcast the event live, showing images of massive flocks of birds blanketing cityscapes, their voices echoing through the streets. Social media exploded with speculation and conspiracy theories. Some dismissed the event as a mass hallucination, a collective delusion fueled by fear and anxiety. Others saw it as a sign of the apocalypse, the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Governments around the world scrambled to respond. Emergency meetings were convened, scientists were consulted, and military forces were put on high alert. The United Nations issued a statement urging calm and caution, but the message did little to quell the growing sense of panic. Dr. Thorne, watching the events unfold on television, felt a surge of vindication and dread. His theories had been proven correct, but the implications were terrifying. He knew that the birds' warning was real, that the disaster was imminent. But he also knew that time was running out. "We need to understand what they're telling us," Thorne told his team, his voice urgent. "We need to find the meaning behind their words. The fate of humanity depends on it." The pressure was immense. The world was watching, waiting for Thorne to decipher the bird's message and provide a solution. But the message was cryptic, and the clock was ticking. The fire was coming from the sky, and the only question was, could humanity find shelter in time? The coordinated global message had changed everything. It was no longer just a bizarre phenomenon. It was a clear and present danger. The world was on the brink, and the birds were the only ones who knew what was coming. The unified message from the birds triggered a cascade of reactions across the globe, most of them rooted in primal fear. Governments, caught between the need to inform the public and the imperative to prevent mass hysteria, struggled to maintain order. The first priority was deciphering the message, a task that proved far more complex than initially anticipated. Linguists, cryptographers, and scientists from various disciplines worked around the clock, analyzing the bird's words, searching for hidden meanings and cultural references. The phrase, "The fire comes from the sky," was interpreted in countless ways, ranging from a literal meteor strike to a metaphorical representation of technological collapse or divine retribution. "Seek shelter in the earth," sparked a frantic search for suitable locations. Some experts believed it referred to underground bunkers, while others pointed to caves, mines, or even ancient burial grounds. The reference to old stones added another layer of complexity, leading to speculation about historical landmarks, geological formations, or even forgotten religious sites. The phrase, "Heed the whisper of the wind," was perhaps the most enigmatic, prompting interpretations ranging from weather patterns to acoustic anomalies to spiritual guidance. Some believed it was a call to listen to scientific data, while others interpreted it as a plea to reconnect with nature and intuition. As the experts debated, the public grew increasingly anxious. The lack of clear answers fueled speculation and paranoia, leading to a surge in doomsday scenarios. Survivalist groups gained new followers, and underground bunkers were quickly booked up. Religious cults experienced a resurgence, with charismatic leaders promising salvation to those who followed their teachings. In some areas, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Panic buying led to empty shelves in supermarkets, and riots erupted in several major cities. Looting and violence became commonplace as people fought over dwindling resources. The authorities struggled to maintain control, and martial law was considered in several countries as a last resort to restore order. The United States, under the leadership of a beleaguered president, declared a national emergency and activated the National Guard. Military personnel were deployed to maintain order, distribute supplies, and enforce curfews. Similar measures were taken in other countries, but the situation remained volatile. The Internet, usually a source of information and connection, became a breeding ground for misinformation and conspiracy theories. Fake news spread like wildfire, fueling distrust and exacerbating the chaos. Social media platforms struggled to contain the flow of false information, but their efforts were largely ineffective. Dr. Thorne, working tirelessly with his team, felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew that the bird's message was the key to survival, but unlocking its secrets was proving to be a monumental task. He urged governments to remain calm and avoid rash decisions, but his pleas were largely ignored. "We need to trust the birds," Thorne argued in a televised address. "They are not trying to scare us. They are trying to help us. We must listen to them, and we must work together to find a solution." But his words were drowned out by the cacophony of fear and uncertainty. The world was teetering on the brink of chaos, and the bird's warning, intended to save humanity, was instead driving it towards destruction. The race was on to decipher the message and avert a global catastrophe. But time was running out, and the fire was drawing ever closer. The governments of the world, facing unprecedented challenges, struggled to maintain control as society threatened to unravel amidst the global chaos. And the failure of conventional methods to decipher the bird's message, Dr. Eris Thorne became the focal point of all efforts. Governments, now desperate for answers, granted him unprecedented authority and resources. He was given a secure facility, a hand-picked team of experts, and access to every piece of data collected on the avian phenomenon. Thorne, acutely aware of the stakes, shifted his approach. He realized that simply analyzing the bird's words wasn't enough. He needed to understand the context of their message, the underlying reason for their warning. He returned to his original theories, positing that the birds were reacting to an environmental or cosmic shift, something that humanity, in its technological arrogance, had completely overlooked. "We are so focused on our own world, our own problems," Thorn explained to his team. That we have become blind to the larger forces at play. The birds are telling us that something is happening on a scale we can't even comprehend. We need to broaden our perspective, to look beyond the horizon. Thorn directed his team to analyze data from every available source: meteorological readings, astronomical observations, geological surveys, even historical records of unusual natural events. He was searching for any anomaly, any deviation from the norm that could explain the birds' heightened state of alert. While his team scoured the data, Thorn focused on a more radical approach: establishing two-way communication with the birds. He believed that if he could directly interact with the avian collective, he could gain a clearer understanding of the impending disaster and potentially even find a way to mitigate its effects. This endeavor was met with skepticism from many of his colleagues. They argued that it was impossible to communicate with a non-human species on such a complex level, that the bird's mimicry was simply a random phenomenon with no underlying intelligence. But Thorn remained convinced that it was possible. He began by studying the birds' vocalizations, analyzing their songs and calls for patterns and meanings. He identified certain frequencies and rhythms that seemed to elicit a response from the birds, a subtle shift in their behavior or a change in their vocalizations. He then developed a complex system of audio cues, using a combination of natural sounds and artificial tones, designed to mimic the birds' communication patterns. He broadcast these cues from a network of strategically placed transmitters, hoping to attract the attention of the avian collective and initiate a dialogue. The initial results were discouraging. The birds seemed to ignore the cues, continuing their cryptic pronouncements without acknowledging Thorn's attempts at communication. But Thorn refused to give up. He fine-tuned his system, adjusting the frequencies and rhythms, experimenting with different combinations of sounds. Finally, after weeks of tireless effort, he achieved a breakthrough point one evening. As he was broadcasting his audio cues from the facility's rooftop, a flock of birds gathered overhead. They circled the building, their wings beating in unison, and then they responded. Their response wasn't in the form of human speech, but rather a complex series of chirps, whistles, and trills, a symphony of avian vocalizations that seemed to echo Thorn's own cues. It was a clear sign that they had heard him, that they were acknowledging his attempt at communication. He had opened a door, a potential pathway to understanding the avian mind and unlocking the secrets of their warning. The long, arduous journey to understand the birds had finally yielded a potential breakthrough, offering a glimmer of hope in a world teetering on the brink of disaster. The initial exchange of avian vocalizations was just the beginning. Thorn understood that he had only established contact, not communication. The challenge now was to translate the birds' chirps and trills into meaningful information. To understand the specific threat they were warning about. He focused his efforts on a single bird, a raven that seemed to act as a conduit for the avian collective. This raven, which Thorn affectionately nicknamed Corvus, consistently responded to his audio cues, exhibiting a level of intelligence and awareness that was both astonishing and unnerving. Through a painstaking process of trial and error, Thorn and his team developed a system of learned responses. They associated specific audio cues with simple concepts, such as yes, no, danger, and location. By observing Corvus's reactions to these cues, they slowly began to build a rudimentary vocabulary, a bridge between human language and avian communication. The process was slow and frustrating, fraught with misinterpretations and false starts. But Thorn persevered, driven by the belief that the fate of humanity rested on his ability to understand the birds. He spent countless hours observing Corvus, studying its behavior, and refining his communication system. Finally, after weeks of intense effort, he achieved a major breakthrough. He was able to ask Corvus a direct question about the nature of the impending disaster. Is the fire from space? Thorn transmitted, using the audio cues he had painstakingly developed. Corvus responded with a series of rapid clicks and whistles, followed by a single, clear caw. Thorn's team, analyzing the response, determined that the call was the avian equivalent of yes. The confirmation sent a jolt of adrenaline through Thorn. The fire was indeed from space. But what kind of space-based threat could cause such widespread panic and destruction? He continued to question Corvus, probing for more information. Through a series of yes/no questions, he learned that the disaster was related to the sun, a massive release of energy that would overwhelm the Earth's magnetic field and wreak havoc on its technological infrastructure. Solar flare? Thorn transmitted, his voice trembling with anticipation. Corvus responded with another affirmative caw. The realization sent a chill down Thorn's spine. A massive, undetected solar flare. It was a plausible explanation for the bird's warning, a cosmic event that could trigger widespread chaos and devastation. But why hadn't humanity detected it? Why were the world's leading astronomers and astrophysicists oblivious to this impending threat? Thorn realized that the solar flare must be of an unprecedented magnitude, something far beyond the range of existing detection systems. The birds, with their heightened sensitivity to environmental changes, were the only ones who had sensed the danger. He now understood the urgency of the bird's warning. The solar flare was coming, and humanity was completely unprepared. He had to convince the world of the imminent threat and find a way to protect the population before it was too late. The limited exchange with Corvus had revealed the nature of the threat, but the clock was ticking, and the solar flare was rapidly approaching. The task now was to translate this knowledge into action and save humanity from a cosmic catastrophe. With the confirmation of the solar flare, Thorn faced an uphill battle to convince the world of the imminent danger. The scientific community, still skeptical, demanded concrete evidence. Something that was difficult to provide given the flare's unprecedented nature and the limitations of existing detection. Technology. Governments, wary of triggering mass panic, hesitated to issue a public warning based solely on the word of a disgraced ornithologist and the pronouncements of talking birds. But time was running out. As the solar flare intensified, the birds' messages became more frantic and desperate. Their fragmented speech grew clearer, more coherent, and more insistent. They began to offer specific instructions for survival, seemingly guiding pockets of humanity towards geographically disparate safe zones. Go north, to the mountains, where the water flows underground, the birds chanted in Alaska. Follow the river, to the valley, where the stones sing, they echoed in Nepal. Seek the caves beneath the desert, where the air is cool, they whispered in Egypt. The safe zones were diverse and seemingly random, scattered across the globe in remote and often inhospitable locations. Some were natural formations, such as caves and canyons, while others were ancient structures, such as ruins and temples. The common thread was that they offered protection from the effects of the solar flare, shielding from radiation, access to water, and a stable environment. The birds' instructions were not only geographically specific but also tailored to local communities. They provided guidance on how to prepare for the solar flare, how to find food and water, and how to maintain social order in the aftermath. It was as if they possessed a detailed knowledge of human societies and their vulnerabilities, and were offering personalized advice for survival. Thorn, working feverishly with his team, attempted to map the safe zones and decipher the birds' instructions. He realized that the birds were not just warning humanity about the solar flare but were also providing a blueprint for survival. They were guiding those who were willing to listen towards a path of safety, offering a chance to rebuild civilization after the coming cataclysm. He pleaded with governments to take the birds' warnings seriously, to disseminate their instructions to the public, and to prepare for the imminent arrival of the solar flare. Some leaders, swayed by Thorn's impassioned pleas and the mounting evidence, began to heed his advice. They issued public service announcements, established evacuation routes, and stockpiled resources in the designated safe zones. But others remained skeptical, dismissing the birds' warnings as nonsense and refusing to take any action. They were blinded by their own arrogance and their faith in technology, unable to comprehend that a non-human species could possess knowledge that they lacked. As the solar flare drew closer, the world became increasingly divided. Those who believed in the birds prepared for the worst, gathering their families and heading towards the safe zones. Those who didn't continued with their lives, oblivious to the impending doom, convinced that the warnings were nothing more than a hoax. The birds, sensing the approaching cataclysm, grew increasingly agitated. Their voices filled the skies, their messages echoing across the planet, a desperate plea for humanity to heed their warning and seek shelter before it was too late. The fate of the world hung in the balance, dependent on whether humanity would listen to the wisdom of the birds or succumb to its own hubris. The instructions were clear. The safe zones identified, but the choice remained: survival or oblivion. The final days before the predicted arrival of the solar flare were marked by a stark division within humanity. On one side were those who heeded the birds' warnings, the believers, as they were increasingly called. They packed their belongings, said goodbye to their loved ones who refused to join them, and embarked on arduous journeys towards the designated safe zones. Highways became choked with traffic, as families crammed into cars, trucks, and even bicycles, determined to reach their destination before the cataclysm struck. On the other side were the skeptics, who dismissed the birds' warnings as mass hysteria, a collective delusion fueled by fear and misinformation. They clung to their normal lives, convinced that the solar flare was nothing more than a scare tactic, a conspiracy orchestrated by governments or corporations to control the population. They ridiculed the believers, labeling them as gullible fools, sheep blindly following the pronouncements of talking birds. This division fractured families, communities, and even nations. Friendships were torn apart, marriages dissolved, and political alliances shattered. The world became a battleground between belief and disbelief, between those who sought safety and those who embraced denial. In the cities, chaos reigned. Looting and violence continued unabated, as resources dwindled and desperation grew. The authorities struggled to maintain order, but their efforts were largely ineffective. The social fabric had unraveled, leaving behind a Hobbesian state of nature where survival was the only law. Outside the cities, the exodus towards the safe zones resembled a modern-day pilgrimage. People from all walks of life, united by their belief in the birds' warnings, traveled together, sharing their resources and supporting each other through hardship. They formed makeshift communities along the way, offering food, shelter, and companionship to those in need. The journey was fraught with danger. Roads were blocked, supplies were scarce, and the threat of violence loomed large. But the believers persevered, driven by their unwavering faith and their determination to survive. They saw the birds as their guides, their protectors, and their saviors. As the solar flare drew closer, the birds' presence became more pronounced. They flocked overhead, their voices echoing through the skies, urging the believers onward, guiding them towards their destination. They acted as beacons of hope, reminding humanity that even in the face of impending doom, there was still a chance for survival. Thorne, watching the mass exodus unfold on television, felt a mixture of hope and despair. He was heartened to see that a significant portion of the population had heeded the birds' warnings. But he was also saddened by the fact that so many others had chosen to ignore them. He knew that the coming solar flare would be a test of humanity's resilience, a crucible that would forge a new world from the ashes of the old. He could only hope that enough people would survive to rebuild civilization, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and to create a future where humanity lived in harmony with nature and respected the wisdom of the birds. The societal fracturing was complete. The believers were on their way, the skeptics remained behind, and the world held its breath, waiting for the fire from the sky to arrive. The choices had been made, the paths diverged, and the consequences were about to unfold. The solar flare arrived on August 15th, just as the birds had predicted. It began subtly, with strange auroras appearing in the sky, even in regions where they were normally unseen. Then, the power grids began to flicker, streetlights went dark, and communication systems went offline. The digital age had come to an abrupt and devastating end. The full force of the solar flare unleashed a torrent of electromagnetic radiation that overwhelmed the Earth's magnetic field. Satellites burned up in the atmosphere, communication networks collapsed, and electrical systems short-circuited. Cities plunged into darkness, and the sounds of sirens and alarms filled the air. The environmental effects were equally devastating. Wildfires erupted across the globe, triggered by down power lines and extreme heat. The ozone layer thinned, exposing the surface to harmful levels of ultraviolet radiation. The climate became erratic, with extreme weather events occurring in rapid succession. In the cities, the skeptics quickly realized the gravity of their mistake. Their technological comforts vanished, and they were left to fend for themselves in a chaotic and dangerous environment. Looting and violence escalated, as people fought over dwindling resources. Many perished from starvation, disease, or violence. In stark contrast, the areas guided by the birds fared significantly better. The believers, having reached the designated safe zones, were shielded from the worst effects of the solar flare. The caves, canyons, and ancient structures provided protection from radiation and extreme weather. The underground water sources ensured a steady supply of fresh water, and the local ecosystems provided sustenance. The birds continued to guide and protect the believers, leading them to food sources, warning them of dangers, and helping them to maintain social order. They acted as a living compass, navigating the post-apocalyptic landscape and ensuring the survival of their human companions. Thorne, who had taken shelter in a deep underground bunker with his team, monitored the situation remotely, using the limited communication equipment that had survived the solar flare. He was relieved to learn that the areas guided by the birds had suffered significantly less damage than the rest of the world. His theories had been proven correct, and the birds had saved a significant portion of humanity. But the world had changed forever. The digital age was over, and civilization had been reset to a pre-industrial state. The survivors faced a daunting task: rebuilding their societies, learning to live in harmony with nature, and ensuring that such a catastrophe never happened again. The solar flare had been a wake-up call, a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability and its dependence on technology. It had also revealed the hidden wisdom of the natural world, the ability of non-human species to sense and respond to environmental changes that humans were oblivious to. The areas guided by the birds stood as beacons of hope, testament to the power of belief, the importance of respecting nature, and the enduring wisdom of the avian world. The world had been remade in fire, and from the ashes, a new chapter in human history was about to begin. In the aftermath of the solar flare, the survivors emerged from their shelters into a world transformed. The familiar landmarks of civilization were gone, replaced by a landscape of scorched earth and shattered infrastructure. The digital age was a distant memory, and the survivors faced the daunting task of rebuilding their societies from scratch. But amidst the devastation, there was also hope. The believers, who had heeded the birds' warnings and sought refuge in the designated safe zones, had weathered the storm relatively unscathed. They possessed the knowledge, the resources, and the will to rebuild, and they were determined to create a better future. Those who survived thanks to the birds now viewed them with a mixture of awe and reverence. They saw them as saviors, a new form of oracle, capable of sensing and responding to environmental changes that humans could not perceive. The birds became integral to their daily lives, providing guidance, warning of dangers, and helping them to navigate the post-apocalyptic landscape. Society was irrevocably changed. The old ways of life were gone, replaced by a new paradigm that valued community, sustainability, and respect for nature. Technology was no longer seen as an end in itself, but rather as a tool to be used wisely and sparingly. The survivors learned to live in harmony with the natural world, recognizing their dependence on its resources and its wisdom. Avian communication became a crucial element of rebuilding. The survivors developed new methods of interacting with the birds, learning to interpret their songs, their calls, and their behavior. They established avian listening posts, where trained observers monitored the birds' movements and deciphered their messages. These messages provided valuable information about weather patterns, resource availability, and potential threats. They also offered guidance on how to cultivate crops, how to manage water resources, and how to maintain social order. The birds became an essential part of the decision-making process, helping the survivors to make informed choices about their future. New forms of governance emerged based on consensus, collaboration, and respect for the natural world. The survivors learned to listen to each other, to value different perspectives, and to work together towards common goals. They created sustainable communities based on principles of permaculture, renewable energy, and local self-sufficiency. Education was also transformed. Children were taught to respect the birds, to understand their language, and to learn from their wisdom. They were also taught the skills necessary to survive in the post-apocalyptic world, such as farming, hunting, and crafting. The survivors honored the birds in their art, their music, and their literature. They created new myths and legends that celebrated the avian world and its role in saving humanity. The birds became symbols of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of nature. Thorn, who emerged from his bunker to witness the dawn of this new era, felt a sense of profound satisfaction. His theories had been proven correct, and the birds had played a crucial role in saving humanity. He dedicated the rest of his life to studying the avian world and promoting a deeper understanding of its wisdom. The world had been remade, and the birds were at the heart of its rebirth. Avian communication was no longer a fringe theory. It was the foundation of a new civilization, built on respect for nature and the wisdom of the birds. Years after the solar flare, Dr. Aris Thorn, now a revered figure, continued his research, driven by an insatiable curiosity to understand the full extent of the birds' awareness and their connection to the planet. He established a research center in one of the safe zones, a remote valley nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, where he could study the birds in their natural habitat. He spent his days observing the birds, analyzing their songs and calls, and attempting to decipher their complex communication patterns. He collaborated with the survivors, learning from their experiences and incorporating their knowledge into his research. He developed new technologies to monitor the birds' movements and track their behavior, always careful to minimize his impact on their environment. As he delved deeper into the avian world, Thorn began to uncover evidence of a level of intelligence and awareness that was far beyond anything he had previously imagined. He discovered that the birds were not just reacting to environmental changes but were actively shaping them, influencing weather patterns, regulating ecosystems, and even affecting the Earth's magnetic field. He realized that the birds were not just messengers or oracles. They were guardians of the planet, an ancient and powerful force that had been protecting the Earth for millennia. They had sensed the impending solar flare long before humanity, and they had intervened to save civilization from itself. Thorne's research led him to question the very nature of reality, to consider the possibility that the universe was far more interconnected and conscious than humans had ever imagined. He began to see the birds as part of a larger cosmic web, a network of intelligent beings that were working together to maintain balance and harmony in the universe. The final scene of the narrative takes place on a mountaintop overlooking the valley. Thorn, now an old man with a long white beard, sits on a rock, surrounded by a flock of birds. He closes his eyes, takes a deep breath, and listens to the bird song. As he listens, he begins to understand the birds' message, not just their words, but their underlying intent. He realizes that the solar flare was not just a random cosmic event. It was a catalyst, a necessary shock that was designed to awaken humanity to its true potential. The birds had known all along that humanity was on a path of self-destruction, that its technological arrogance and its disregard for nature were leading it towards a catastrophic collapse. They had orchestrated the events leading up to the solar flare, using their ability to mimic human speech to warn humanity of the impending danger and guide it towards a path of survival. It was a carefully orchestrated intervention, a desperate attempt to save humanity from itself. The birds had acted as a collective, using their unified consciousness to influence events on a global scale. They had sacrificed their own safety and well-being to protect humanity, demonstrating a level of altruism and compassion that was both humbling and inspiring. Thorn opens his eyes, a look of understanding on his face. He smiles at the birds, acknowledging their wisdom and their sacrifice. He knows that the future of humanity depends on its ability to learn from the birds, to embrace their values, and to live in harmony with the natural world. The birds take flight, soaring into the sky, their voices echoing through the valley, a song of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of nature. The camera pans up, showing the Earth from space, a small blue planet teeming with life, protected by the watchful eyes of the birds. The implication is clear. The birds knew all along, and their intervention was a testament to the interconnectedness of all things, a reminder that even in the face of impending doom, there is always hope for renewal and redemption. The story ends not with a sense of closure, but with a call to action, an invitation for humanity to embrace its true potential and create a future worthy of the bird's sacrifice.